war teaches you a lot. My father's city was totally destroyed, most destroyed city in Europe, 94% flat. And I remember walking over this pile of rubble as far as you could see. And he said, and right underneath where we are is the main street of the city. So you couldn't see any street. The war ended in May 1945. And so the only currency in circulation was the Reichsmark, which was Hitler's currency. And of course, nobody wanted that when the war was over, but it's the only thing we had. If you had something that people wanted, like silver coins, they would take you into the back room. And that's where the groceries were that you really wanted to buy.
In a world where trust in paper money crumbled, one man's childhood in war-torn Germany taught him a timeless truth. It's 1945, and young Bert Dohmen, surrounded by the ruins of World War II, watched as silver coins, small, shining lifelines, became the only currency that could buy food for his family. In those desperate days, gold and silver weren't just metals, they were survival. Now, decades later, Bert's story reminds us how precious metals can save lives, secure futures, and stand strong when everything else falls apart. Please welcome back to the program Bert Dohmen. He is the man behind the Wellington Letter. And of course, we will talk the economy with him. But first, I thought it was really important that he share his story. Bert, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
It's always great to be with you, really. Thank you for inviting me and for doing this, because it's really, history is an important lesson, always.
Absolutely. And I'll just give some context. You were really part of the inspiration for this series because I had posted a clip from a Frank Giustra interview recently where he spoke about how he realized how hyperinflation in a blink of an eye destroyed his family's fortune, his father's wealth, any wealth they had. And from that day forward, it was clear to him that had the family had gold, they wouldn't have been in the situation they were in. And, he went on to have an extremely successful career in gold. You wrote to me after seeing that and saying how touched you were by Frank's story and how it resonated with you and made you think of how silver saved your family. So can you give us some background about your time in Germany?
Yeah, there was the war ended in May 1945. And so the only currency in circulation was the Reichsmark, which was Hitler's currency. And of course, nobody wanted that when the war was over, but it's the only thing we had. So the Allies finally came out with their own allied currency, and later on, that was replaced by the German mark. That was, I think, around 1950. But so there was a period when there was really no money in circulation that people wanted. They would take it, but you wouldn't get the stuff that you really wanted. If you had something that people wanted, like silver coins, they would take you into the back room. And that's where the groceries were that you really wanted to buy. And at the time, my parents still had a lot of the thalers, they were called Thaler, Maria Theresian thaler. And that was a very well-known silver coin issued by the Hungarian Austrian Empire. And so everybody knew the content. And that was the desired medium of exchange. My parents had that, and that allowed them to buy food and the things that they wanted for us kids. And it was really amazing how, with the paper money you couldn't get anything. And but that also reminded me of a time because as kids were playing during the war years.
Yes.
With currency that my parents had from the German hyperinflation, which was in 1921. And they had currency notes that had written on 1 million marks, okay? And it was rubber stamped on top of it, 1 milliard, which was a billion marks, rubber stamp. They couldn't print fast enough, although the government confiscated all printing presses just to print currencies, but it still wasn't enough to print all the paper money that they needed. So they used rubber stamps to change the value of each currency note. Can you imagine that? My parents had a lot of it. We kids played with that money, you know?
Isn't it incredible? I feel like only people who lived through it, like you, like Frank, I interviewed Lobo Tigre on this as well. You experienced hyperinflation. You experienced like zeros all of a sudden being eliminated from money. Do you think, why do you think it's so hard for Americans to believe that this could happen here?
Well, because it's never happened in the United States. Americans have a big disadvantage over other people. Other people in other countries, most of them have experienced devastating wars. The United States has not had a devastating war in its soil. The last war was the Civil War, and that really war teaches you a lot. Bad times teach you many bigger things. The Depression, people who lived through the Depression in the US and was worldwide, in fact, they learned so much. And, I remember my parents talking about 1921, the hyperinflation, the smart, wealthier Americans, they came over with bags full of American gold coins, and like the $20 piece and so on. And with a few silver coins, they were buying up the biggest luxury hotels in Germany, like in Berlin and so on. Can you imagine buying a big, beautiful hotel just with a little bag full of gold coins? Because money was worth nothing. The owners of the hotels could not afford to pay the employees to buy the food, etc. So those are tough times. You learn a lot during times like this. And I was a little kid at that time, but boy, did we learn! And my memories
Wow.
are so clear of that time. We went
Wow.
through the rubble of houses. Like my father's city was totally destroyed, most destroyed city in Europe, 94% flat. And I remember walking over this pile of rubble as far as you could see. And he said, and right underneath where we are is the main street of the city. You couldn't see any street. Yeah, so that's how it was. And so we would go as kids, we would go through all the destroyed houses and so on and try to find metal, zinc, for example. The gutters were made out of zinc. Then the big price was always the lightning rods in houses. They had tips of platinum for conductivity. And boy, if you found one of those, that was a lot of money. So we take it to the scrap dealer, and the dealer, of course, would always cheat us, but because we didn't really know how much it was worth. But we made a lot of money as kids just finding metals, copper from the wreckages, the zinc from the wreckages, etc. And it really teaches you so much about life.
And you feel you felt compelled now to even you're compiling these stories, right? Because they're so important. You're actually writing a book on this time, Bert?
Yes, I've been writing basically my memories of my life for the last several years. I don't know if
Yeah.
it will ever get completed, but
I
it's
hope
very
so.
therapeutic. It's really when you start thinking about it, then suddenly other memories come back. Like we used to go out during the air raids, and at night the British would come with low altitude bombing at night. The Americans would use high altitude bombing during the daytime. So at night we'd go out on our balcony, and during air raids, you could see all the beams of the searchlights converging onto the enemy airplanes, and the German fighters would come up and start shooting them down. We saw that. It's like watching a
Can't
movie.
imagine.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't imagine. I mean, it must be so difficult for you to see the images of wars happening now. And I mean, when you're speaking of, not having access to cash or the importance of gold and silver. I mean, I just read an article how, the ATMs are down in Tehran and people can't access money. We also saw that obviously in Ukraine. We even saw it during a blackout in Spain. So this all of a sudden people not having access to cash can happen in a blink of an eye.
And Bitcoin is not going to save you in a time like that because you are not going to have access to the internet. So it's a real physical metal, valuable level that people want. That's what you need in times like these. The silver coins are fantastic for that.
So you like having a lot of silver coins.
Yes.
I mean, do you think that because of what you lived through, that puts you on the path that you're on today of educating people about the importance of owning physical metals, the fact that you have an educational newsletter? Do you think that somehow that became your calling?
Yes, Daniela, that's what I try to do. We've been doing the Wellington letter now for almost 49 years, and we have an international circulation. And I share with people my own experiences and so on. And you can learn that. I've been trading the markets for 60 years, so you learn a lot during times like that. And experience is everything, especially in the markets that we're seeing today. Experience is more important than anything else.
Speaking of that, let's talk about your thoughts on what you're seeing. You say it's a perfect bull trap right now. Explain, Bert.
Yes, everybody's very enthusiastic. We're seeing record highs in household assets in stocks, record highs. We've never had households having so much of their assets in stocks. That's always a big warning sign itself because the public is usually wrong. And so you have to think, look at with all the uncertainty right now, when you have huge uncertainty, smart money managers will raise cash. They will get very defensive. And this is what we're seeing. We had the big decline until early April, and that was a prelude. And then we had the big rally to squeeze the short sellers, which is of course, generated by the algo traders and the high frequency trading. They make a lot of money during these rallies and they promote the market upward. And then we get financial TV adding to the enthusiasm. You got to buy stocks and look at this stock is only selling at a PE ratio of 100 or 500 to 1. You got to buy it. I cannot believe that they're recommending stocks that are selling at a PE of 500. Oh, because it's a great company. No, there's no such thing as a great company. There's a great CEO of a company, but a company is a shell. It's a legal shell. It doesn't have a life on its own. The company is no better than the CEO.
I remember since the start of the year, had warning us about layoffs coming, about the situation, the dire situation on the jobs front, Bert. How do you see it unfolding here?
Yes. First of all, if you look at the economic statistics, do not believe the jobs numbers from the BLS. BLS, I say, stands for, well, you can imagine what I say, what it stands for, but it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Those numbers are phony. They have been phony forever because they use seasonal adjustments in order to get to the number that they want. I always wrote jokingly, I said, they just call the White House and say, okay, what number would you like for jobs? And that's the number they fabricate. You're not going to get a real number. Like we just had the biggest loss of in the labor participation rate. That is the people leaving the labor force. It was the biggest plunge on record. But then everybody celebrates. Oh, we got 139,000 new jobs. No, every job, all the jobs created since 2018 have been non-Americans. Okay. So, in other words, the migrants. We had 21 million migrants. Okay. So they're counted in the jobs numbers. Can you imagine that? People don't know this. People have to look at seasonal adjustments. The seasonal adjustments, the BLS has never explained what goes into the seasonal adjustments.
Bert, one thing I think you're happy about is that people are finally paying attention to the point of no return, which is the U.S. debt, mostly thanks to Ray Dalio, who's come out and been talking about it so much. People are finally waking up. What are your thoughts on Dalio, publicly coming out and saying that the U.S. is really at the tip and nearing the point of no return here.
Well, we've been at the point of no return for the last 60 years, ever since 1971, when we basically defaulted on a debt by making the US dollar not convertible into gold. That was when Nixon closed the gold window, 1971. Why did he do that? I can only guess because that was a really daring move. There was no reason to public knowledge for him to do such a risky move, to suddenly say we were not going to give you gold anymore for dollars, although we had promised you that we would. So my question is that why would he do that? Why would he take such a risk at a time when there was no need to do it? Is it maybe that he found out there was no more gold in Fort Knox? Could that be the reason? Why does the new U.S. Treasury Secretary, he's on record, he told reporters, he said, oh, all the gold is there. I saw it. There's no record of him ever going to Fort Knox. Then he said it's audited every year. No, it is not. I know Ron Paul very well, Congressman, and he tried to get it audited since at least 1978. Never got it audited. Okay, so there's possibly no there. So you have to consider that. Now, we have record imports over the last year of gold into the United States. Is that maybe an effort to put some gold in there before there is an audit? I don't know.
What's your hunch? What's your hunch, Bert?
Well, all the evidence suggests that the gold left before 1971. And that was the
Wow.
reason for going off of the gold standard.
So you don't think it's there? Bert, you don't
Well,
think it's there?
I think there's a good chance it isn't. Why would they refuse to have it audited? Tell me
Because
that.
of who they leased it, maybe how many times it's been leased, or I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Who does it belong to, right? Maybe it's
Who
all
does it
leased.
belong to, right?
Yeah. So there's so much going on with central banks that we don't know. The Bank for International Settlements now, the BIS in Switzerland. Now they determined a few years ago that gold held by banks can be counted as a tier one asset. In other words, it
Yeah.
has no risk. Officially, gold has no risk. So in the US now, that didn't take effect, but it will take effect, I think, July 1st. And so then it will be a tier one asset for US banks. They can hold gold and not have any reserves against it. That's a big advantage. It's much better than having treasuries. So uh, I would assume that will increase the demand of gold.
I have something to bring up. When you say we've been nearing the point of no return for the past 60 years, there's some people who might hear that, Bert, and say, well, we could then add another 60 years. If we've come this far, what's a little bit more debt?
Exactly, Danielle. That's my point. I think this is a scare story. I started my business in 1977. Okay, and the first part, that was when we had the double-digit inflation, etc. In fact, I was on many panels with Ray Dalio at the time. He had a financial newsletter he published out of his apartment in New York. So obviously, it's a lot smarter than me because he got to be a multi-billionaire with his hedge fund that he started later. But Ray and I, we had beers together during that time and so on. And we usually had the contrarian opinion at the conferences. But I've heard that argument, excessive debt. Our debt is, yes, it's terrible. It's terrible, but it's going to keep on growing. Because I remember when we complained, this was maybe 40 years ago, about adding another $2 or $3 billion to the federal debt, $1 billion to the federal debt. Now we're talking about $1 trillion. People don't even know. You ask the average person, do you know how much a trillion is? The average person doesn't know how much a trillion is.
Does the Fed just step in at that point, do you think? And then
Yeah.
we start QE up again?
But they're always stepping in. Money supply right now, the last numbers that they published was at a new record high. It just broke out to a new rate. Money supply, and the Fed tells us they're tight. No, they're not tight. You know, see, the definition of tight money is totally wrong. Everybody says, or seems to say, that rising interest rates tell you that the Fed is tight. No, there are two distinctly different reasons for interest rates rising. Okay. And I pointed out in 1978, when the Fed chairman in 1978 said, we're not going to fight inflation with tight money, we're going to do it with interest rate policy. And I said, okay, that means rising interest rates. That means inflation full speed ahead. And that means stocks will rise. And there was a Wall Street economist for Goldman Sachs, Gary Wenglowski. He said, that is absurd. He had a seminar in my city, and I went to it. He said, oh, rising interest rates cannot lead to rising stock prices. I said, yes, it can, because stocks will become an inflation hedge. Companies can raise prices as inflation goes up, and therefore it becomes an inflation hedge. And the stock market did rise while our interest rates went double digits. And my forecast of a 20% prime rate actually came through in 1980 with 20% prime rate in early 1980. Then the Federal Reserve stepped on the accelerator temporarily and said, but I looked at the unadjusted money supply number because they also publish seasonally adjusted money supply and then the real money supply. And the real money supply I looked at unadjusted, and it was soaring at the same time that the Federal Reserve said, no, no, we stopped the printing of money. No, it was soaring. So they were lying. Okay, that was in June of 1980. Okay, and I said by year end, we're going to have a new high in the prime rate. It's going to be over 20%. On December 10th in 1980, we had a prime rate of 21.5%. So that's how you can stay ahead of the people who are trying to pull the wool over our eyes. There always are. Whatever comes out of Washington, you can be sure it's false.
Bring it home for us, Bert. Are you doing anything differently this summer, positioning yourself differently? What would you be telling people watching?
Well, I think right now the old saying that we used a long time ago is there are times when the person who loses the least is the person who makes the most, you know? So you don't want to lose money, you know? And forget all this talk about, oh, here's a great stock and wonderful stock, and oh, wow, it's going to go to sky high and so on. All these promo, all the IPOs, these big gains in the IPOs right now, this is these are manipulated in order to whet the speculative appetite of the public. That's it. Lure them into the market at the top. I've been saying for the last couple of months, said this rally is going to go until one of the major indices makes a new record high. Okay, we're now within 1.7% to about 2.7% of new highs in the major indices. Okay, so we're very, very close. So I wouldn't be surprised if the S&P makes a new record high, at least long enough so financial TV can celebrate and pop the champagne corks and say, "Oh, we made a new record high," and everybody, the public that doesn't know any better, they plunge into the market with their last pennies buy stocks. You know, so these are usually bull traps. Okay, and you want to be very careful. I have seen now over the last several weeks many signs of distribution. Distribution is when the big smart money sells the stock positions to the public. Okay, because they don't want to hold the stocks all the way down. Somebody has to own a stock on the way down in the bear market, but they don't want to do it. So they get the public to do that. The public becomes the bag holder. Joe Granville used to call them that, the bag holders. You know? So we are all elected to be bag holders. So you got to find a way not to be a bag holder. So precious metals now, gold and silver, are a great alternative.
And on that note, I urge everyone to reach out to us at ITM if you have any questions about investing in gold and silver. I think just based on your very personal story, Bert, thank you for sharing that with us. It's so obvious why we need to be owning physical gold and silver.
Yes, but own it. Don't let somebody else keep it for you.
Right. You want to own
my
it.
preference. You want to own it,
You want to
and
own it.
that's the important thing. And the Wellington
Exactly.
letter that we publish now, it's in its 49th year, and we write 2 issues usually per month, and each one is about 25 pages. So you get 50 pages, single space, of the best analysis that you will ever see. There's no one else that comes close.
Thank you so much, Bert. Again, thank you for joining us for this series that you really helped inspire with your personal firsthand experience with how silver saved your family in Germany during World War II. Thank you so much, Bert Dohmen. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for the opportunity. All right, Dania. Have a great day. And I wish you all the best to your listeners. They are fantastic. There's so many comments we get on these interviews and so on.
They
You
are the
have
best.
fantastic listeners. Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
blessed. They are the best audience. I love them so much. And thank you, Bert. And thank you for watching. We'll have more great content coming your way. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.